Hello, everybody. Welcome. So I'm Tess. I am from Writable, which is an ed tech company that focuses on reading and writing instruction and curriculum. I was in the classroom myself for about 8 years, and I'm really excited to be here today with Dr. Troy Hicks and Andy Schoenborn, who are professors and teachers and part of the National Writing Project, and have written an amazing book called Creating Confident Writers, which we're going to be talking a bit about today, and a little bit about Writable. So Writable is everything you need to effectively teach writing, organize instruction, whether you're at home or in the classroom or teaching in a hybrid model. We have over 600 assignments and prompts free to choose from, or you can make your own. We provide data and feedback on how your students are performing as writers over time. And we also really guide that feedback. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but many types of feedback. And we also work really well with your LMS and Google Classroom. So everything is in one place. And we're used by over 10,000 schools and districts at this point. And the wonderful publishers of Troy and Andy's book have a special offer for everybody. This is in the resource guide, which Heidi will be dropping in the chat link, but you can get 20% off of your purchase. And you can also find this book on Amazon, and the links are in there if you want to check out their book after this. It's wonderful. I read it this summer. Mm-hmm. So a little bit about Troy and Andy, if you haven't already heard about them. Troy is a professor of English and education at Central Michigan University, and he is the director of the Chippewa River Writing Project, which is a part of the National Writing Project. And he really focuses on learning design and technology, and has his doctorate in educational technology programs. He's a former middle school teacher, and he collaborates with teachers all over the country. I don't know about you, but I've seen Troy speak a lot. You might have seen him at conferences back when we could go to conferences in person, and I'm sure hopefully soon we'll be back doing that next year. He has earned many awards, including the Michigan Council of Teachers of English Charles Carpenter Fries Award, the CMU Provost Award for junior faculty, the Richard A. Mead Award, the Michigan Reading Association Teachers Award, CMU's Excellence in Teaching Award, the Initiative for 21st Century Literacy's Research Divergent Award for Excellence. More awards. And you're ISTE certified, and you have many, many books out there, articles, blogs, chapters. He's very active on Twitter, and he's a wonderful person to chat with. So I'm so excited to learn from Troy today. And Andy, who is his co-author in this most recent book, is a high school English teacher. So props to Andy, who is teaching online at the moment. We understand, and he really understands where you guys are all at. He's also in Michigan. He focuses his work on student-centered critical thinking, digital collaboration, and multimedia. In 2013, he was honored with MCTE's Ray Lawson Excellence in Teaching Award. I know you're also the former MCTE president, correct?
Yep, that's right.
And let's see, many more awards. Let's see. The 2014, the Great Bay Lakes Region Ruby Award. 2017, the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribes ISE Inspiration, Support, and Encouragement. 2019, the NCTE Linda Reef Award for Outstanding Publication in Peer-Reviewed Journal. Again, past president of Michigan Councils of Teachers of English. You're also part of the Chippewa River Writing Project. And Andy is also wonderful on Twitter. So highly encourage you both follow them. And I will pass it over to you guys.
Well, thank you so much, Tess. Thanks to everyone at EdWeb for hosting us tonight, and we are going to jump right in. I think that our next slide probably has those same introductions again, and I will just take a moment more to say that we are connected and affiliated through the Chippewa River Writing Project. I'm sure Andy and I met at some other English conference or something before then, but Andy's been a TC for our writing project for, we can now say, a decade. That's kind of scary, my friend, but we're proud to be a local site of the National Writing Project. And much of what we did in the design and implementation of these lessons and everything that Andy, maybe not almost everything Andy does in his classroom is probably informed by writing project work. So we're always grateful to our colleagues at the local and national level as it comes to writing project work. And if you're interested, certainly you can check out the writing project online. So with that in mind, we're going to launch with a very quick question, one that we ask ourselves and ask our colleagues quite often. And don't worry, this is a no judgment zone. You can answer this question in any way. If someone says to you, "Are you a writer?" what would you respond? Perhaps a little quizzical look and turn of the head, but if someone were to ask you, "Are you a writer?" would you say yes or no? And I think we will be sharing those results here in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and submit my vote. Hopefully, I don't put it out of balance here. And Andy will have lots to say about this soon. So yeah, we've got.
I don't know if everybody can see this, but it looks like we've got about 55% say yes and 45% say no. So about half and half.
Yeah. And, in many ways, we're with you. On any given day, I don't know that I would call myself a writer either. And even though Andy leads our writing group each week and we have different conversations about writing and we write articles and books and blog posts and things like that, we know that no matter what, writing is just hard. And part of the reason why we might say we are not writers and our students might say, "I am not a writer," is because they don't feel that confidence. They don't feel that they are living into what it means to be a writer. And so, one of the main themes for tonight is that writing is hard. The second theme is that teaching of writing is hard as well. That said, we've got some ideas. We don't know that we have all the answers, but hopefully we have at least some insights that can help move us forward. And so we were pleased to have received a review of our book from another fellow writing project director. And so very kind words that were said, and the one right in the middle there, that sentence that says, "Inviting someone to write is very different from assigning them something to write." And we want to carry that message throughout the webinar tonight, thinking about, yes, ultimately we're in school and we're kind of playing the game of school and we do have to assign things and we have to assess things, but how can we invite our students to be writers as comparing to just telling them that they need to be writers and then grading them and calling it all done? And we're going to get a real great glimpse into Andy's classroom to think about that. So with all that in mind, just a little bit of a 30,000-foot view, one of the documents that we used to frame our thinking for the book was indeed the Framework for Success in Postsecondary Writing. This was developed in 2011 by the National Writing Project, also our other main professional organization, the National Council of Teachers of English, and then the governing body for writing program administrators across the country. And rather than setting out specific standards that needed to be met, they set out a list of what they called their habits of mind. And you see the habits of mind here: being curious, being engaged, being persistent, being flexible. And of all of these, the one that we really want to hit on tonight and hope kind of keep coming back to and making sense of will be about metacognition. And we're going to be thinking about that first from the stance of invitation, and then moving into this conversation about metacognition. And you'll find that in our book, we have this three-part stance that we keep coming back to: this invite, encourage, and celebrate. So invite, encourage, and celebrate. That's the tweet-worthy bite to take away from this evening. And at this point, I'm going to kind of turn it over to Andy to lead us through the next segment.
Great. Thank you, Troy, and Tess, and everyone else joining us. I think it's important for us to consider what we mean by invitations, because I suppose you could almost think about every assignment as being an invitation. But I think it's also kind of, we can invite students, but there's also that expectation that you better do it. And a lot of the writing that I do in my classroom with my students are invitations to share, invitations to write in different kinds of ways, and invitations to set goals and ways for themselves too. So when we're talking about the invitations, students do sometimes have a chance to opt out of that. In fact, if we go around the room to share something that has just been written, if a student opts not to share, I might gently nudge them to kind of move forward with their sharing. But it is an invitation that I welcome their ability to pass on those types of things as well. We're not talking about every single assignment, and you'll see as we go through these that there are specific, purposeful, and intentional ways in which we help to offer invitations for students. And usually the writing that happens in any classroom is writing that's pretty, I'm going to say raw, writing that's kind of off the top of their head, writing that hasn't gone through a whole lot of revision. And so in that writing, that can make writers feel pretty unconfident. So we can allow them to know that their words are valued, but also give them those moments and value them as human beings as well. And school also has this tendency, not even a tendency, school does this, right? Like school sets goals for students. So here's an example, right? Like if you want to pass a class, you have to do the certain assignments to pass the class, and then you will pass and you have a goal kind of set up for you. But it's pretty rare, I think, where students actually have a chance to set their own goals and think about what is it that they want from a literacy education for themselves. What is it that they want, and how can they give input into giving presentations they want to give, perhaps, or writing papers they want to write, perhaps, or spending time with topics and ideas that are worthwhile and valuable and interesting to them. In short, goals are great, but unless writers are invested in those goals, unless they've shared those investments with other people, it has a tendency not so much to be something that writers want to stick with too much. So one of the things that I do in my classes is we use what I call blog folios for reflection. It's essentially using a blogging platform. I use edublogs, but I've also thought about using Medium, or you could use Blogger, or you can use lots of different kinds of blogging platforms. But I use it in a different kind of a way. It's not so much for creating a portfolio as it is to create a spot where students can pause and reflect on the work that they're doing in class. And that framework, which comes at regular stops along the way, I teach in trimesters. So we'll have an invitation to write at first about their literacy experiences. And then they can continue on talking about some creative writing, independent writing, think about their reading, and also think about some of the ways in which they're growing across their learning in the classroom as well. And this leads back to that main topic that Troy talked about. We can look at the framework for post-secondary writing success in lots of different ways, but metacognition is the one that really helps writers solidify their identities as writers, see themselves as writers, and be confident enough to be able to grow as writers in themselves. Because school just traditionally is set up where the only feedback you get from a teacher that really is important to students, I suppose, might be that grade. Like I have students who will tell me, just tell me what I need to do to get the grade. And when you're just trying to go after the grade, like I have a lot of students do, it removes them from the process of, in this case, writing. It removes them from the process of their learning. And metacognition allows us as teachers to say, okay, let's hit the stop button on the educational conveyor belt for just a few moments here. Let's do it for like a week. And let's dig in deep to what it is that you're actually thinking about your learning. They get a chance to examine the processes that they think, reflect on the text that they have written and also read, and also gives them a chance to think about one writing project that really stands out to them. And they can begin to identify areas in which they have grown as readers and writers and people who are literacy minded as well. So this asks us kind of an interesting question, and I would say even up to maybe about 6 years ago, I couldn't answer this question too well. And that question is, we're going to ask you to just see if you can put every day, once a week, once a month, or never, but how often do you create time and space for metacognition and reflection during writing instruction? I think we'll see what the poll results say, but I think a lot of times what happens with this metacognition and reflection is we're all kind of under the same pressure cooker, right? We're trying to get results out really quickly and trying to make sure students have grades and get those pushed out. But it's interesting to see here. It looks like we kind of have a interesting split.
Yeah, I'm seeing, there's definitely a group that does it every day and a group that does it as about never as much as a group that does it once a week. So yeah, it definitely looks like we've got people all over the board, which is great to talk about, what you're doing right now and how to improve or what best practices are.
Yes, and I think too those results help us to think about metacognition in lots of different ways. So I've had students today, for example, read a piece. We're doing a study on tragedy. Students read a piece by Joseph Crutch called "The Tragic Fallacy," and so they read it. They took some notes. They did some reflecting on it with a group. They shared back some of that reflection. So that's the way metacognition can happen every day. But then we also take purposeful time every 6 weeks to do deeper dives into our reflection and to really help students see that, yes, they are growing as far as literacy is concerned. It's Ann Whitney and Colin McCracken and Dina Wischel and teaching writers to reflect that spend a lot of time showing us that the intentional process of reflection really transforms its students' actions in the classroom from an empty satisfying of teachers' assignments and to real learning experience. Otherwise, and students will say this to me quite often, that without taking that time to reflect on what it is that they're doing in the class, it almost feels like they're just doing stuff. Like they're just doing assignments, they're just doing tasks, they're just going through the motions, they're doing whatever the teacher tells them to do. And this isn't, necessarily their fault. It's not necessarily even our fault. It's just gives us a moment to pause on that idea of how can we give some intentional reflection in the work that we're doing with our students. And I had alluded to this a little bit, but I thought it would be nice to see how I set up this natural flow of reflection in my classroom. So there's some purposeful things happening here. And the very first day of class, I have my students write a ELA journey post where they talk about their reading goals, their writing goals, and then their overall literacy goals that they have for the class and for themselves. In their ELA journey, I asked them to think back and concentrate on what are their roots. So where does their literacy come from? Like, where do they remember learning how to read? How did the reading happen? What positive memories do they have about reading? What kind of challenges do they have about reading? And the same thing goes for writing too. What challenges do they have? What sparks do they have? What are the things that really kind of captured them? And time after time over the last 3 years, students keep pointing to one spot that happens in their education where a love for reading and a love for writing tends to die pretty quickly. And that tends to be right going into junior high. And I think the reason for that is, and my students have told me that they believe the reason is, right around that time, what do we start doing to reading and writing? We start attaching grades to it. We start attaching these other critiques that go outside of it. We start labeling and categorizing as you being good at it or not good at it. Sometimes we turn these into challenges and competitions where there are the winners and losers, the people who are good at reading and not so good at reading, and the same with writing. And in that first post, it forces students to think about and dive deep into what is it that they have been doing in their schooling that's going to help them succeed, because they're going to have many teachers. Some are going to be fantastic. Some will be any range of how they connect with teachers. But in the end, they're the ones who are in the seats, and they're the ones who are learning, and they're the ones who need to be taking ownership of the reading that they're doing and the writing that they're doing. That becomes a really interesting piece for us, because in the blogs, when students write that, I have them respond to each other in the blogs themselves. And a lot of students find commonalities. So when we can begin to find common ground in that first week, I don't need to do the normal kinds of get to know you kinds of games that we might do. Some of the, I guess I would call them maybe silly, I can remember everyone's name in the classroom type of a thing by the end of the hour. And it gets us into real thinking about what it means to be a reader and a writer in this particular class and for them. From there, they'll have a creative writing piece, and you'll see that's kind of sandwiched there in week 6. That's right around midterms. I teach in trimesters, so we have a 12-week trimesters. So about midterm, we spend a week, press pause on that conveyor belt, We ask them to think about their creative writing pieces, independent reading analysis, and growth territories as well, in which they talk about ways in which they've grown. We do the same thing near the finals, and then the final exam is actually a reflective final exam where they're asked to go back, look at their blog posts, and begin to identify areas of growth for themselves where they have seen and they felt confidence in their experience. I already talked a little bit about this. That's their ELA journey to this point. So I think I'm not going to talk about this. I'll just move on because I spoke about that already a little bit. After they get done writing that, I asked them to use a letter to future me, which is a website, futureme.org. And in that website, they've done some thinking. I asked them to write that letter to themselves. They have their ELA journey post done, and they write a letter, whatever they want to say. They can say what they want to include as their reading, writing goals, as their literacy goals, what they want to do there. They can, sometimes students write little things to themselves. And if you hear me kind of pausing in what they might write, it's because I don't ever see these. When they write the letter to themselves, it goes to themselves, to their email boxes, and I have them deliver it where they choose a specific date and they deliver it during the week of final exams. So when final exams come up, they get a letter that they have crafted to themselves 12 weeks earlier that reminds them what it was they were trying to accomplish. Because writing is hard, schooling is hard, learning is hard, growing is hard work. We don't call them growing pains for anything when we're growing up through adolescence. So sometimes in those moments, we can kind of forget what our goals might have been. So it's nice to be able to see those pieces come up. And then I also try to set my classroom up not only from a larger reflective arc over the course of a trimester, but also I try to set up some habits and routines so we have a flow of the day throughout the course of a week. Every single day, there is poetry in my classroom. On Monday, we have spoken word poetry. Today, we're actually doing spoken word brackets where we have two different poems kind of in competition with each other. It's not really that much of a competition. It's just a way for us to hear beautiful words, respond to beautiful words with each other, and share the reasonings why we might like something better than another, without just saying, I don't know, it just resonated with me. I want students to dig in a little bit farther about what specifically that they like about those pieces. This is an ungraded assignment, and it's an invitation to share a little bit of ideas they have. I've updated things on Friday just a little bit when it comes to those poems of the day. I have what I call Featured Poet Friday, where I go through student work and see their work, and then I invite them to share their poems with us, and I invite them to recite their poems with us, and I also invite them to put their poems on an online registry where I keep all their poems for a long time, because the writing that I see in my classroom, especially the creative writing, the independent writing, is so brilliant sometimes. Just to see it stay in a digital box somewhere, or just put in a portfolio somewhere, is not a great place for it. We can share those types of things out. And in those invitations, they're not graded. I don't cajole students. In fact, I had a student who wrote a wonderful poem this last trimester, and I wanted to use his piece, and he politely declined and said, no, thank you. It's nice to hear that you liked my poem, but I'm naturally kind of a shy person, so I'd rather not. And that's okay. That's all right with me. That gave him some ownership and agency over what he was doing there. The rest of this, you can see that I teach in a writing and reading workshop. So you'll see some silent reading on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'll take 15 minutes for that. And on Tuesday and Thursday, we do creative writing where I offer a prompt. But I always finish the prompt by saying, I don't care what you write. I just care that you write and you're writing creatively. And that gives students a license to be able to share whatever they want to write during those times, because it's very rare where students are not just writing for anyone else but themselves, and I try to give them those instances there. When it comes to
Can we interrupt you for just a moment? There's two especially pertinent questions in the chat. One is, can you speak really quickly about those deeper dives, just kind of that rotation that you go through? And then also, I think you are going to talk about this, so this is maybe more a cue to let the people know that you're going to talk about them writing for blogs and things like that. So if you could cover that kind of 6-week rotation really quick again, I think that would be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So we start here, and then you can see in that weekly, those weekly moments, we have 15 minutes Monday, Wednesday, Friday to do reading, and students can read what they want independently. And then that reading analysis is where they do. I ask them to count the page numbers that they have. I'm not doing a tracking thing for them. I just want them to see that they are reading more pages than they think they're reading. I also ask them to talk about what they're liking about the book, what's pulling them into the text, and if they feel like they have to push their way through a text, why is that happening? And more importantly, why are they continuing to read a book that they feel like they have to push their way through? So they do a short reflection on that. And I also ask them to take a picture, like a hand, like take out their cell phone and hold their books in their hand and take a picture with them, because I want them to not only know the number of pages that they've read, I also want them to be able to feel the weight of the words that they've read too, because those moments where we can feel that actual physical thing, they stick with us a little bit better than just simply writing down a number and kind of going through it. Those are the things that people tend to remember. It's one thing to say that I've read 700 words. It's another thing to say that I've read 1.5 pounds of books, which I think is interesting. And then the Publishing for Choice creative writing piece, they write Tuesdays and Thursdays, 15 minutes, so a half an hour a week. And when we come to 6 weeks, I ask them to go back through that and select one piece that they feel like is standing out to them. A lot of times it's poetry. It doesn't have to be poetry, but whatever it is, I'd like it to be a finished piece and finished product. And then the growth territories itself, I will share with them what it is that I kind of had for them as goals, and where they might have experienced movement outside of their comfort zone. So whenever they feel that experience outside their comfort zone, that's when they're growing. And in those moments, they have a chance to share and really recognize to themselves that, yeah, they actually are learning and they are really growing in those spots and becoming better at what it is that they're working on. In this case, literacy. So I think I'm going to be covering a little bit too as we go through here, Troy, but we'll see how we go.
And as Andy's getting ready to kind of launch back in, many of the resources, the Google Doc templates, things like that, you'll find on our digital handout, and I'm adding your questions there too. When you click into those chapter companion pages on my website, the links then to a lot of Andy's Google Docs and things are there too. So hopefully they're there, and we'll try to direct you in the right way.
Mm-hmm. When it came for me to try to figure out what I wanted to do for the independent reading, I leaned a lot on my friend Amy Ludwig Vanderwater's Poems Are Teachers. Now, I teach AP Lit, I teach 11th grade, I teach 12th grade. Her book here, Poems Are Teachers, are really meant for elementary. But what I like about the book is not only does it give us a sample of a mentor text, it gives us prompts to think about, but then the author of each of the texts, each of the poems, talk through and walk through their process. So we can get a better insight of the process of, in this case, writing poems and writing creatively. These are graded, but they're not graded for how well the writing is done. I am grading I want to see that it's kind of structured well. I want to see a high definition summative image of their piece, a title. I want to see that it's been revised and edited. CW stands for creative writing piece. I want to see that at least it looks publishable. So some of the things we can kind of take care of, like punctuation and capital letters and things like that, are pretty easy to take care of. And then I think the two most important parts is this part here that's words from the author. That's the inspiration piece. Those are the things that readers wouldn't necessarily know just by reading whatever piece they have. So I love Bohemian Rhapsody as a movie, and I love Rocket Man as a movie too. Probably because I love Elton John, and I love Queen as well. But what's really interesting, and the reason why those biographies becomes popular, is because we get an insider's view of what was happening behind that musical process. In this case, with words from the author, readers get an inside view on what was really happening, and that gives us a chance too to be able to have students see that we can't always make assumptions about what a writer is writing within that piece. Sometimes those assumptions are correct, but oftentimes something in writing is not actually exactly the way that we thought it was. And then they have a chance to share the revision decisions. So if they do those types of things, I get to share with them a student example. They'll get the credit for that. So it's not meant to be something overly difficult to grade. And these are the places where I'll keep them in livewrite.edublogs.org. So you can see all of my student work in there too. I'll probably throw a link to that here later so you can see that. Gives us a lot of good student mentor texts, which I think in many cases are more valuable than like professionally published mentor texts. Because when we have a professionally published text as a mentor, it's easy to say, well, I'm not published, so I don't know if I can do that. In this case, when you see students who are the same age in the same class, it gives writers a little more confidence to feel that they can probably lean into that a little bit more. We do the same thing with reflecting on our reading strides. I talked a little bit about that reading analysis, and they have a picture of the books read. And you can see here, Emma has a huge pile of books, and I wanted her to take that picture of it in a stack. I usually have them hold in one hand, but she would have to hold them in two hands, which is still that weight she kind of gets to feel. And that was 6 weeks, so she's a much faster reader than I am, that is for sure. And these growth territories, we talk about whatever unit that we're looking at. And in this case, we're going to be talking about trending topics later in this presentation. But I show them potential territories because I don't know if you have school-age children. I do, from kindergarten to junior high to high school. And every single day I can ask them, so what'd you do in school today? And the answer is always, I don't know, or nothing, or whatever. And that's not their fault either. I mean, when you're in the process of something, it's always hard to identify. So we pause here in that 6th week and in that 11th week, and I give them some reminders of these are some of the things that we've done. How about choosing your topic? How about starting with why? We talk about that. How about we had an opportunity to work with Dr. Borsheim Black from Central Michigan University and her students. So what about the experience with working with pre-service students? How about developing an inquiry? How about these ideas from Book Head Heart Framework that are put together by Colleen Beers and Bob Probst? So a lot of these give us moments where students can say, well, I think I learned more here or I grew more there, but it helps connect with what we're doing with the experiences that they're having in class as well. And it gives them a chance to write about that a little bit. So in this case, the same type of thing happens. So that reflecting on growth territories, they're going to go through that project process reflection. You're going to have a high definition summative image. I like to see 3 to 5 different areas of growth. And I also like to see one screenshot of a growth area. So for example, if my students are right now using Writable in class, and so if Writable is helping them and they feel like it's helping them grow, I'm going to ask them to take a screenshot of it, either using their computer or using their phone. And that way they can put an image along with the ideas that they have too. I also have them find the standards for which they meet these areas of growth. So if students were to say that they read multiple types of texts and multiple genres of texts, they can find that in the Common Core, or they can find that I use ISTE standards, I use NCTE standards, I also use ILA standards as well. And they can find those and they can see, instead of me saying, see, you've met that, they can say to themselves, oh, I'm actually kind of doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing and the things that are expected out of me from people in post-secondary situations. So learning in growth territories have been really helpful for students as well. And, this kind of gets me to this thought. I did say that I never see letters to future me, except this one student did share hers with me. I told her we were writing the book. It would be nice to be able to see something that she had. Her and I had built a pretty good conversation and a pretty good rapport with one another, and so she was happy to share hers with mine. And this is what she wrote to herself in the beginning of the trimester, and you can see what she was hoping for herself. She wrote, "Dear future me, I hope this past trimester has been one for the books, because right now you need something memorable like that. As you know, English classes have been so monochromatic for as long as you can remember. So again, hopefully this class was a rainbow. A few things that have been in my mind lately, like as in the past decade lately, is how reading has fallen off my to-do list. Of course, reading has been something that I've been similar to as a comfort object for you, but lately it's been covered in dirt and crumbs and blah. Anywho, one of the goals for your past trimester was to find that spark again. If that didn't happen, that's okay, because we can try again. Remember that falling in love isn't a thing that typically happens after the first date. Other than reading, I seriously hope that you found something or someone who you can really talk to again, because you need some of that right now. I know that when you write, sometimes for pleasure, but maybe you found a way to write for others as well as for yourself. Regardless, I just really hope that all is well in every way, shape, and form. Also, that you're taking care of yourself and you're getting everything in order to fill out those college applications. Good luck with everything that's about to come to you, girl. With love, you but younger. And what I really liked what Esme had to say in there, and I'm thankful that she shared it, is our students have a lot going on in their lives. Yes, literacy and reading are some things that they may not be thinking about as much, but they have other things that they're worried about and thinking about. And if we can give them those chances to talk about those in spaces and places that are safe, it opens up that vulnerability that they have, and it allows them to write what they want to write first, so that the audience that they're writing for is themselves first before they're writing to other people. So when we tie this all together, these are the questions that we use for their final reflective exams. So my exams are a little bit different than what might typically be there. I asked them to look back at their blog folios. I asked them to think about their future me letter. And I asked them to think about why they chose those goals. It's hard to remember why you might have chosen the goals, or maybe you forgot 12 weeks later. So did they meet them? Did they not? When they look at their blog folio, which moments stood out to them as significant growth? Where did they put in the most effort? What did they notice about it? What intellectual risk seemed to have the richest reward? And intellectual risk is something that students struggle with because they don't quite understand what it is. So I asked them, I said, well, if you shared something and you're not used to sharing or don't want to share, or maybe you recorded your voice, or you did something outside your comfort zone that at first you wanted to resist, but you pushed through and did it anyway, that's an intellectual risk. So which one of those things made you feel more comfortable at doing those things? And then how did it shift your approach in future items? And then I really want them to think about this in their final exam. What do you believe you are adding to your overall literacy repertoire? That's what we're trying to get students to do. What can they get out of the class? Not just what can I give to my students, but what are my students pulling out of the class as we go on? So that, I think, answers that question too that was there earlier, Troy, about that kind of what do we do in this arc of all of those different moments to pause and reflect.
I definitely think so. And actually, just a quick moment, if you could take, Andy, I know your background is in special education, and there's quite a bit in the back channel, and I've been trying to point out some resources and just generally acknowledging the ways in which you adhere to universal design for learning principles in your instruction. But if you'd want to speak to that for just a moment before moving forward, that would be helpful.
Speak about with special education students?
Yeah, just the ways in which you work with students with special needs and invite them to do this kind of work as well.
Yeah, so I spent about 10 years teaching in resource rooms. I have a master's degree in emotional impairments and learning disorders as well. And I know as a special educator, and I also know as a general educator, one of the toughest things was trying to figure out what am I going to do with those IEPs. But I also wanted to meet students' needs, but I also wanted to create an environment in which students felt comfortable to be able to explore without feeling as though they are differing in any kind of way. So, first I got rid of some tests and quizzes. I noticed that tests and quizzes were things that kind of popped up an awful lot in IEPs. So when I stopped giving tests and quizzes, that changed things an awful lot. So what am I doing instead of tests or quizzes? I'm asking students to write authentically. I'm asking them to write meaningfully. I'm asking them to write from personal experiences. And I'm also not comparing their work to the work of others, but I'm asking them to push themselves to kind of see, yeah, okay, that person in that example had a lot of writing. How much of that can you get? Are you able to move a little further than that? Tell me more about that. Those types of ideas help to push students to see that they too can be writers. Oftentimes what happens is in those moments, I guess I should say it like this. I think I'm going to say it like this. Students in special needs classes, especially resource room classes, typically are told in prescriptive measures what they need to do and how they need to do it, which is not necessarily a horrible thing, except a lot of agency is taken away from those students. So by having independent reading and by having independent writing and by welcoming them in wherever they happen to be at, it helps to create more agency for our students, no matter who you are, and helps them to see that they are just they're in this process just along with everybody else. And it's and they're really no different. They just might not have had any opportunity to show and share what they're capable of because they're always writing for someone else besides themselves. And I really find that I know for myself, and I think I can speak for Troy, I know for many writers, when you're writing for yourself first, that changes the ball game because you are diving into something that you are personally interested in, personally invested in, and it changes how you're going to approach that writing. Sometimes I'll say to students, I want you to have a relationship with your reading. I also want you to have a relationship with your writing. And the reason I say that is because, and I use the term relationship, because if you've ever tried to write something, maybe you wanted to start up a relationship, perhaps you have to end a relationship, but those writing moments, even if it's through text, we can be very careful with what we could do with them and the thoughts that we can put into that writing. Of course, some people are not as careful as other people. That's certainly the case. But those types of ideas help students to personalize it and move that writing into something that it's not just for me as teacher, it's not just for the assignment, but it's for me as a student and what I want to get out of that. We could probably do a whole nother webinar.
And there are so many tremendous questions in the Q&A. I'm trying to capture them all in our shared resource doc. And now we're going to let Andy take a moment to catch his breath. And Tess is going to jump in. And we're going to now kind of be thinking just a little bit about what else we can do, especially as we're moving into these virtual, remote, hybrid, concurrent, I don't know, all the different adjectives we're using to describe what we're doing this year. So we'll let Tess take it away for a few moments here.
I just have to say, it has been such a joy to listen in on how Andy teaches in his classroom. Your students are so lucky. And such a gift that you're sharing all of these insights and tips with everybody. I know, I was a teacher and I still learn new things every day getting to work with teachers. So wonderful. I really have appreciated that. I know you mentioned you are using Writable this year, and Troy and Andy have been working with the National Writing Project a bit, working on assistive feedback technologies, which is a piece inside Writable. So I did want to sort of show a little bit about Writable and also some tips for, taking what Andy is doing and showing that you can still do it online, right? You can still do it when you're teaching hybrid. You can still use these tips and these kinds of practices, no matter if you're with your students or not. So I know we're all really focused on either in person or hybrid or virtual, or I think oftentimes switching between those three and sometimes really quickly. And we don't really know what the rest of the year holds or what our schedules look like. So it's important to have a way to continue your schedule and what you're teaching your kids, no matter where you are at, right? So what tools are needed to support that transition between virtual, hybrid, and in-person learning is something that comes up a lot because, that's what we have to use tools because we're not always in the classroom. So these are some truths and tips that I've found is, I know that teachers only have so much time. Andy, Troy, you guys only have so much time. So sometimes you have to choose a minimal amount of tools to use. It's really important that they're comprehensive and that they're robust, and so you don't have to use a million tools, right? Just because you may be tech savvy, you're trying to have a really comprehensive online classroom, it doesn't mean you need a million things. They should work with your LMS or Google Classroom, whatever you're organizing your classroom around. They should be, robust and have curriculum, instructional features. Sorry if you hear my dog in the background. And they should support both synchronous and asynchronous learning, right? So not just online or in person, but when you're transitioning between the two. So if you choose tools that fit these criteria, you're really choosing tools that are worth your time, worth your teacher's time and parents' time, and helping that transition. So we know at Writable, we focus on practice, feedback, and assessment. And when we talk about assessment, we're not just talking about formative assessment, but really background assessment and gathering data on how students are doing and helping them prep for assessments. And that practice that Andy has been talking about, whether they're quick writes, whether they're long essays, whether they're poetry. We're really trying to help support reading and writing and whatever curriculum you are using in your classroom, or if you're building your own, and then also feedback. I know I've heard from a ton of teachers that feedback is more important than ever this year. Feedback and grading are oftentimes thrown into that same bucket. But feedback is how we build relationships. It's how we're communicating. It's how we're staying in touch with teachers. So I did just want to really quickly go through some of the different types of feedback you can have, because I know Troy is going to talk a little bit about feedback next. So you can have peer and self-review. This is a little bit about what it looks like in Writable. I know that can be hard for teachers to run on their own, which we try to make it a faster, speedier, easier process in Writable. You can have live conferencing for feedback, live feedback for conferencing. So whether you're doing it on Zoom, whether you're having that like live conversation back and forth, teacher grading is really important and trying to speed that up and make sure that you're reaching the students that need feedback most. So this isn't necessarily grading, but really talking to your students and giving them feedback on their work while they're writing, not just at the end of their work. And then Revision Aid, which I know you guys have been using a little bit this year, which is that on-demand feedback, which is so important for independent practice, which so many students are doing these days. So it's on-demand feedback, and it makes it so a teacher has a higher quality piece of writing when they get to them. And then we also have originality checking and Writable. We do have tons and tons of assignments. I think if you would like to explore them, you can head over to Writable. You can also make your own. So any of the amazing prompts that Andy has been talking about can totally be recreated in Writable, where you can find pre-made assignments and edit them yourself. We also have a virtual learning center. So this is a little bit an overview of all the different kinds of ways that we support virtual and blended learning. And then I'll pass it back to Troy. And let's talk a little bit about mentor texts and response to reading and that feedback piece, because I know you are a feedback savant. You
A feedback savant. That's funny.
Well, I'm definitely a proponent of feedback, and I think if there's any pedagogic guilt that I carry, it's that if I don't get feedback to students in a timely manner, I know that that's what I would want as a student, and I want to help them move towards their goals more quickly, especially when we're in the process of writing. So I'll be really brief here because I know Andy's going to move into all of these. You know, we talk about the exploration of mentor texts. There are many great mentors that we have where we've learned about mentor text, including Allison Marchetti and Rebecca Odell, who have their book, Writing with Mentors, and the Moving Writers blog. Responses to reading. I know Andy's going to talk a little bit here about Kylene Beers and Bob Probst, among others, who give us ways insight to respond to reading. And then with revision and feedback. And just to kind of briefly say that, you know, having read Hattie and having read all these other things, you know, the way that I think about feedback is that it needs to be timely, specific, and goal-oriented. And Writable is a tool that allows me to do that a little bit more efficiently. And hopefully we'll have some time to share some tips again, too. So just quickly going through the next two screens just to show you a little bit of what the Writable interface looks like for setting up the assignments. And that's what it would look like there, where students would see, you know, the elements on the left that they would then read to. They get some tips, and then they could move into writing their narrative, and you can set up graphic organizers. And then this is kind of what the feedback interface would look like over on the right, where students would give themselves their own self-review, and then you can move that criteria into the form for peer review as well as teacher review. So with that said, we're going to let Andy take back over again and pull in a quote from the journalist and teacher who was kind enough to write the preface for our book.
Yeah, John was really kind to be able to write that. I think a lot of people were able to relate with why they can't write and what we can do to kill the 5-paragraph essay, I think is how he subtitled that. You know, it's not just content that we're interested in. And in fact, I used to be really worried about what is the end product going to look like? What is the end product going to look like? But the more time that I spend with revision, the more time I spend with reflection, the more time I spend in process and in conversation with students in process, really has taught me that I'm not so worried about that end product. I'm worried about what's happening during that process and how can I work with students that way. And Tess had mentioned, teaching in a face-to-face manner, maybe a blended manner, maybe a hybrid, maybe a high flex, and maybe in a virtual manner. I am teaching that way, all three models every single day. So I start with a high flex model where I have students who are face-to-face and virtual at the same time. I have students who are all virtual, and I have students who are in this kind of hybrid format where nobody's virtual, really. They're doing asynchronous work, but they're coming in from time to time. Michigan actually just locked everyone down, so we're all virtual right now, but I've been doing that through all of those. And especially focusing on process right now is really important because it helps students get to that product that I want them to be at anyway. It helps them kind of along that way. And John Warner's work helps us with that. So one of the things that I ask students to do, and I'm going to try to be pretty quick with this because I've done an hour-long topic just on this before, Troy. But trying to help students read YA Lit and then saying something in an authentic kind of a way and picking up books that are going to match what it is that they're interested in is something that can be very powerful. It's not terribly tricky to pull off, but it is something that students really gravitate towards. And a lot of it came from Disrupting Thinking by Kylie Beers and Bob Probst. And I think we know this for ourselves too, right? So like when we can just say when people are lost in a book, we stand a good chance of finding ourselves. So we can say that about students like Kylie and Bob did, but I think that's really any of us. And helping students get to those good books are pretty important. We're not going to do this here because I don't think we have time, but this is the question that I ask my students. I ask them to think about all the topics that are orbiting their minds right now. What are the topics that are trending in their life? And I give them some time to write down. I give about 2 minutes, and they write down all the different topics that are kind of trending in their life. And then we take a look at those. So in 2018, when I did this, and it changes every year, but these were the topics that were in the minds of my students in 2018. Mental illness, which always seems to still pop up, the #MeToo movement, family influences they talked about. They were interested in toxic masculinity, women's experiences, gender roles, marginalized people, college sexism. And one young lady said, I don't really know how to say this, but it seems like every novel that I read has women who are worried about their looks and worried about their body shape and size. And she wondered if she could spend time finding books that weren't so worried about that and celebrating who you were and being positive about your body shape and size, regardless of what that was. And we came up with body positivity as a topic. I have to tell you, if I were to look at these topics, I couldn't think of them all up on my own. And and I didn't know if they would connect with students or not, but listening to students and asking them to share those topics changed the ball game for us because now, yes, they're doing English, but they're doing it in a way that they're purposefully and intentionally choosing. So with that, I asked them, I have little red Post-it notes and I'll give them all to them, or we can do this kind of like in a private message sort of a way, or I can have them write it down on their own at home since we're doing a lot of things virtually now too. But I have them draw a heart. And in that heart, I ask them to share like the real why. Like what's the real reason for your interest in that topic? I ask students that they don't have to be confessional. I'm not asking them to confess anything that they're not comfortable with, but I do want them to be vulnerable. When we can get to the heart of their why, when students can get there, it will increase the likelihood that they're going to want to read the book that they're reading. It's also going to increase the likelihood that they want to write to that because they have an emotional investment in it. So you can see some of the things that students have in the heart of their why. We take those Post-it notes and you can see on the board, or I will gather them in some way where we can take a picture of it. And we don't share, we don't put names on these. These are not graded, but I want everyone to be able to see that we all have a reason for ourselves. and we start with that why, and we share them around a little bit once we kind of get into groups. We can do that through breakout rooms as well if you're in Zoom meetings or Google Meet or whatever you might be in. Then what I do is I can't do it on my own because it's hard for me sometimes to know what new books are out and what books kind of fit with these topics. So I will ask on Twitter, and I get lucky enough to see Darwin to help respond. People from NCTE respond. They give lots of great ideas. That also increases the likelihood that my students are going to want to read some of these things more because I show them those tweets. I'm like, look, people are helping us out. People want to see you read these things. We use the book head heart framework from Kylie Beers and Bob Probst. That helps us to think about this in 3 different dimensions. The book dimension, what's the book about? The head dimension, sort of what surprised me, what's changing, challenging, or confirming ideas that I might have with that topic. And then the heart connection. What am I learning about me? How is this helping me to be a better person, perhaps, or learn more about my topic? We take those at the end. We have them read their books. I have them take kind of picture notes as they go, and they respond using the book head heart framework. We converse, we share our titles, and then I also ask them to do some writing with this, but I don't want them to do writing in just any sort of way. If I'm going to ask them to be invested as they are in the book, I want them also to be invested in the writing. I don't want just another book report. And Donalyn Miller and Colby Sharp's Nerdy Book Club provides an excellent resource for us to do this. They're looking for posts at all time, and they didn't say it had to be adults, so I thought, hey, we're writers too, right? So this gives us different topics that we can think about. Reading lives, new book reviews, retro reviews, pay it forwards, and top 10 lists. And what's great about that is it gives students a choice in kind of what they're going to be writing. It also shows students that there are real people out there doing these real types of writing, and people want to hear about the books that you're reading. And so we can use those. We can use examples from Nerdy Book Club to analyze the different types of posts that people are putting up there. And we look at to see what we want to add to our own posts, and then we share, fingers crossed, and maybe they get published. And every once in a while, I'll have a student who gets their work published as well, and that's kind of cool. It doesn't happen too often, but then again, that's writing anyway, right? Not everything that I've ever submitted for publication has been published. As they think about this, I ask them to look at these mentor texts. What are the expectations of the reviewers? Are they meeting those? Are they not meeting those? So you could see this as like a 1-point rubric, maybe a 2-point rubric if you want to view it that way. But they get comments from me. I ask them to respond to my comments. They either get a check in the needs revision column or a check in the yes column. And they don't get a grade until it's all in the yes column, because I want them to keep going back and keep going back and keep going back until they finally have a piece that meets the needs, not for a grade, but meets the expectations of those specific reviewers for a Nerdy Book Club. So I'm gonna pause there a little bit, Troy. I'm trying to move ourselves along. If you want to pick up here, you can.
I will be very brief to say that I'm going to pass the torch to Tess, who I think is going to kind of bring us to a close. As always, there are so many things to say and to discuss. The chat has been rich and wonderful. I've been trying to capture resources there, put them in our resource doc. Andy, I'm thinking there might be a blog post that we'll have to write about this to answer some of those additional questions, because we just don't have time this evening. So I will let Tess bring it home with closing words, and I think we've got a few slides we'll advance to for you, Tess. So take it away.
Great. Yeah, I'll just click. I don't know if you wanted to say anything about celebrating or mentor texts. But we do have our shared resources, and you can explore Writable, which is the tool that Andy talked about using in his classroom. And there are hundreds and hundreds of prompts there and assignments and a way to facilitate feedback and communication when you're online. So that communication piece is so important with students. So I will just very quickly play a really short video. Okay. To grow great writers virtually or in the classroom. Get access to over 600 customizable reading and writing assignments, or you can create your own. Writable is easy to use and rosters grades and assignments sync with your favorite tech. Students can submit audio, video, images, or digital writing, and even use Google Docs. Writable's feedback engine includes teacher grading tools, guided peer and self-review, live feedback, AI-powered feedback, and originality check. As students write and review, you'll find insightful data and reports on how students are growing as writers. Writable is research-backed, award-winning, and used by over 10,000 schools and districts. Create a free teacher account and get started today. Yeah, and somebody did just ask too if there are open writable sources. You know, everything, all the assignments that you're going to see on Writable are free for teachers to use. Students get 2 free months, and teacher accounts are always free. So there's a really long trial period to see if it works out, and that can be especially helpful with online learning. And I think we should just pop right into any questions we want to ask live if anybody has some. I know I've seen some fantastic questions in chat, and I can open up our Q&A. I know one that I was really curious to hear from you both is, where do you start teaching when you're teaching lower elementary grades how to write? What are some great places to start?
I'll jump in really quickly to say that, having not been an elementary teacher, I was a middle school teacher. I've also had experience at high school and obviously college. I know that I speak through the voices of my colleagues from the writing project, and would say that I think many of the similar types of strategies are quite adaptable, in the sense that, you follow that structure like Andy talked about: present a mini lesson, have them practice it to, with, and by, celebrate their writing, give them opportunities to share and to write for different audiences and purposes. And in terms of like really specific nitty gritty, there was a question about, how do I teach grammar and sentences and extending their ideas and things like that. And I think this works also. Someone had a question about ELL learners. I'm a big fan of sentence combining and using that as a tool for revision, and like quite literally breaking up sentences into smaller chunks, moving them around, playing with verbs, moving the subject to the object position, changing, the different adjectives that surround words, eliminating adjectives, making sure that it's the active verb. So just playing with that idea of sentence combining can be really powerful as well. So I hope those are a couple tips that might be helpful for younger writers, and even for older writers too.
I just want to add, I want to jump in really quick to that too. I don't teach elementary either, but I do have an elementary age daughter. And I know Troy knows Everly. So Everly's in kindergarten. And one of the things that can help younger students, as well as just anybody, is let our students see us writing. Show our writing and process, show our reading and process, demonstrate how we're thinking about the mistakes that we make, not always the perfect, most wonderful things. Let us, even younger students, get involved in the things that we're doing as far as writing goes. My daughter, when I'm in writing groups, she loves to be able to show writing groups all the wonderful things that she's doing. And I'm going to tell you, the elementary age students, at least from my experience right now, are way better at sharing through a screen than my seniors are. In fact, she wanted to come in and say hello to everybody to show off what it was that she was writing. Now, we do a lot of poetry in my classroom. And so students were having poetry and sharing poetry. And she said, "Dad, I have a poem. Can I share it?" And her poem really is very small. Keep in mind, she is 6 years old. She's in kindergarten. So some of you are going to recognize this. Even though her poem is small, and even though her poem consists of 3 words, they're pretty powerful words. I don't know if you can see that. Where am I at? I got a delay. I love you is very powerful words. And then if you see down here below, do you see all the things that she drew? You might not recognize those, but she said those are computers, those are books, those are other pieces of writing that I like to do, Dad, and I love you and I love writing. I think for our younger students, if we can show them our love for writing and our love for reading, it comes through, and our students want to pick up on that too. And the same thing happens in high school. I know the same thing happens in college. I was attracted to wanting to learn more from Troy about 10 years ago because I could see his passion from a teacher researcher perspective. We all need those mentors in our lives too. We can be those mentors to our students simply really by showing our true authentic passion as working writers ourselves, and showing that it's not all what you see at the end, but a lot of times what's great is what happens in the process.
Kind words. Thank you.
That was What a wonderful, your students are lucky and your kids are lucky, Andy. One of the questions that I thought was great is, where was that one? What is the best way to give ongoing feedback? And I'm really curious how you both give ongoing feedback in practice. And I'm going to mute myself because my dogs are chatting with each other.
Right now, the feedback that I'm giving an ongoing kind of practice, we are using, since I'm using Zoom for my classes, I guess it depends on the situation. So I'm teaching an SAT prep class, so that testing kind of environment helps after we do an on-demand, right? I've introduced students to what we call critical friends feedback. It's a feedback loop that helps. And what's nice is I'll ask students to share and give editing rights to their particular document that they're working on, put it in the chat. So we bring it up, we all look at it together. I ask them as readers to read through this piece and give two pieces of warm feedback, highlight specifically where it is, and give in-depth reason for warm feedback, why they're doing something well. And then I have them read those warm feedback comments right back to the writer who can hear it. The writer is not really allowed to say much during that time because I want them to be able to take it all in. And then we go through and give one piece, just one, of cool feedback. So if there could be one thing that we might change, how might we change that and tell reasons why? And then I give the writer a chance to speak back to us and telling what they agreed with, what they disagree with, and what they are planning, and this is important, what they're planning on doing to make those changes. I could spend time just typing, or I could make it an assignment, but I choose to use that time within our time together through a screen to kind of keep ourselves engaged in working with each other, because feedback is a hard thing to give anyway, but it makes it a little easier when you're receiving feedback from someone that you know and trust and can be vulnerable with, and it's not just about, well, do these things and you'll get an A. Oftentimes, and I encourage my students to do this as well, begin with, as a reader or as a writer, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm wondering, this is what I'm thinking, and that removes like criticism of the writer, and it turns into critique for the piece that we're looking at. So that's been really useful for me, especially since, I can't go side by side with students anymore right now. I have to kind of keep away from doing that, but we can find other digital ways. And what's really great about it is that feedback that they get, the warm feedback, the cool feedback, it's already right there on that document. So not only do they have that good stuff, but they also have it right there. So when they're looking at it for themselves, they can choose to make revisions for themselves along the way too.
Awesome. Troy, was there any questions you wanted to specifically answer, or do you want me to keep going from the audience questions?
I can't think of anything in particular. I mean, I'm dropping some more resources in here in the chat, just questions about other openly available resources. I'm pointing to the New York Times, to the National Writing Project, some great curriculum out there. Another resource is 826 Digital, which is the online, as you would expect, component of the 826 National group, which was originally founded by Dave Eggers and is basically a number of writing centers based around the country for youth and community. And they have a lot of great resources available as well. So I'll grab that link to 826 Digital and drop that in here as well. So
Oh, sorry.
I'm saying I do apologize. I just don't think we're going to get to all the questions. We'll try to get them out there and maybe share a blog post here pretty soon.
Yeah, I think one great question to end on maybe is, somebody asked if you used a rubric for your course, Andy, and if so, do you share the rubric with your students? I know we didn't really touch on rubrics a lot here, but I know you use them, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on rubrics and making them available to your students as they write.
Yeah, we develop rubrics as we go. So when we're looking at mentor texts and we're studying mentor texts, I ask students to kind of pinpoint what moves that they're noticing that those writers are making that are attracting them or pulling them in to those specific pieces. Because from an audience perspective, it's easy to kind of recognize what you like and what you don't like. Once we begin to see what we like and what we don't like in other pieces of writing, and I do it with my student pieces as well. So when I share those, I say they're not here anymore, so we can talk about this any way that you want. So what are the things as a reader that's really working for you, or as a viewer or as an experiencer of whatever text that you have? And when we start to find those, I can build my rubrics up that way. So then it's not so much, I know kind of what I'm looking for, but more times than not, students are keen observers of the world, and they're keen observers as readers and writers, even though they don't necessarily know that or maybe would express it that way. But they can pinpoint some things out. Just, oh, you like the voice, and oh, you like the structure, and you really appreciated the fact that they had multiple examples instead of just one example. That's a really great thing to kind of bring up. So we'll talk about it in that way, and we'll build those rubrics together. I would say, though, I have moved pretty far away from like the 4-point rubric, where you would have like, here's the categories and here are the 4 different things, and you kind of fill in the X's and here's your grade. I've moved farther away from that and more to, okay, so as a reader, you said you like these types of things. I'm seeing that you have this, I'm seeing you have this, but I might be missing this portion in here. You said it was important enough to keep it as in the rubric. So what changed your mind in the writing? Typically what happens is the student will say, oh, I actually forgot that. So let me go back and fix that. Is that okay? Yeah, sure. That'd be great. I'm trying to help you create the kind of document that you said that you appreciated in others. And that has helped quite a bit because it removes sort of that pressure from the grade, and it kind of reverts it back all the time to what is it that you want? What is it that you want? What is it that you want? Because so many times rubrics are designed based on what a teacher wants or a curriculum wants, and it forgets what a student is looking for. And I don't think we give our students enough credit when it comes to their ability to discern what they like or don't like when it comes to a text.
Great answer. I really love giving students agency, so I love hearing that. Do we have any other questions you guys want to answer, or are you guys ready to wrap up? I know Troy has added so many answers into the resource guide that we provided today. And also, a final push, you guys have got to check out their book. It is wonderful. They are beautiful writers. I don't know if you've read any of their work before, but they are wonderful writers. And if you liked the tips and tricks here today, their book is just full of really great insight into how to help create confident writers, right? Which is what we all want to do. So thank you everybody for coming. And thank you, Troy and Andy, for sharing your wisdom with us today. It was wonderful to hear from you both.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Bye, everyone.